Hey, everybody. If you weren't here yesterday, the topic this week is uh, it's a phrase I first heard it in the rooms of recovery, but it didn't initiate there. And I've recently learned where this phrase did originate. But the phrase is the God size hole. And what an unusual thing it is to experience that inside of oneself. It seems to me like that is a stage in our spiritual development because a lot of people don't have any notion of that. They don't have a sense that they have a God sized hole inside of them. They would either dismiss, discard, or uh, discount the whole notion of a God sized hole. In fact, there's a whole subset of people that think the entire notion is really rather foolish. But be that as it may, there is the phrase God size hole. And I guess the question is, can you relate to that? Does that strike a chord within you? And in the rooms of recovery, it seems to strike a chord with many. Many realize that that becomes uh, an important concept and then an important experience inside of them because, generally speaking, when people walk into the rooms of recovery, they're trying to use something finite in order to find their fulfillment and satisfaction in life. And it goes from being a mild interest or a distraction to a positive mania. And anytime that that happens, it seems to be a spiritually axiomatic that the quality of life absolutely collapses because we are, in effect, violating the greatest law, the greatest spiritual law of all, which in religious language is stated as, I am thy Lord, thy God, and you won't have any other gods before me. But we don't have to, we don't have to necessarily resort to biblical religious language. There are many other ways to say it. But if you can relate to the God sized hole inside, then the next great question becomes how on earth do we fill a hole inside of us that is of infinite size with finite things? And as soon as we realize that we can't, then we've made this great spiritual step. And that's what I was talking about at the start of the talk a couple of minutes ago. It is a great spiritual developmental stage when a soul awakens. And well, first of all, you have to consider yourself a soul and have a sense of that. And then you realize that as a soul, that no finite thing will fill this infinite longing on the inside. Okay, so all that being said, we have this God-sized hole, and Blaise Pascal, the guy who coined the phrase, the French, he was a French polymath. I think you guys know what a polymath is. A polymath is a genius across a broad swath of disciplines. They're quite rare, but it's the person who's the genius at math, philosophy, science, and golf, for example. Or, it's a number of pursuits or disciplines that somebody is not only good at, but is existing at the level of genius. And they're quite rare, maybe 1 in 100 million, maybe even 1 in 1 billion. But be that as it may, Blaise Pascal was one of those because early in life, he was a polymath of science, the science of the day, at philosophy, and of mathematics, at least. And he was living his life. And at the age of 31, something profound happened to him. He had his great night of fire. It's kind of interesting. It's a play on words that I would notice, but his name being Blaze, it's not Blaze. It's not the English word for fire, but I, I like the connection because at the age of 31, Blaise Pascal had a great night of fire, and he was nominally religious. He was religious in the sense that people were in the day, but he was way more interested in, well, you know what he was interested in? Scientific pursuit, womanizing, gambling, and being way high up in the Parisian social nightlife. Yeah, baby. Yeah. Modern day Bill Wilson. Inside joke. But anyway, so one night, and there's various explanations of his night of fire. I read I read an AI account, and it said, was it caused by a dream? In other words, was it a delusion? Was it caused by some sort of virus or disease that he had undergone? Now, there's the physical world explaining away someone's great spiritual experience. There's plenty of that going on nowadays. If you have a legitimate spiritual awakening, there's no shortage of people more than happy to discount you and put you in the category in the box of delusional idiots who have undergone a manic event. And then the last thing it mentioned in my AI account is that, well, perhaps he had a legitimate spiritual awakening. Could you imagine? But be that as it may, it's interesting to read his writings. I'll leave that up to you. But wow, oh wow, the writings that he wrote about his, it was from 10:30 p.m. to 12:30 p.m. And in that time, fire descended upon him and gave him a great revelation that made him, well, it gave him full understanding of who he was, who we are, and our place in the universe, and who God is. That's all. Just a couple hours, you know. But anyway, it changed him radically. No more womanizing, no more social nightlife, gave up gambling, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, he continued with his scientific pursuits. But in essence, what he realized that we all have a God-sized hole, and until we awaken and realize that no finite thing will fill it up, then all we're going to do is chase finite pursuits, well, literally forever, because as infinite spiritual beings, we can wander through the labyrinths of time forever and just chase this and that and that. But what's the greatest spiritual commandment? That we put God first. It doesn't mean we give everything else up by any means, but it is this realization that in order for we finite beings to be eligible and to experience our God-sized hole to be filled up progressively and incrementally over time, and so that we have our own personal days and nights of fire and grow into our spiritual fullness, that we order life properly. And this simply means putting God first, seeking God first. That's the first commandment, of course. Now, how the hell do you do that? They even asked that question in the recovery movement. We're asked to turn our life and our will over to the care of God. And it says, well, exactly how do you do that? And what do you do? You know, and it is the great adventure, journey, mystery, wonder, glory, discipline, horror, amazement, astonishment, confusion of life to figure out what it means to put God first and to seek that gift first, not to give up all the other gifts, but to realize our finite gifts, golf, math, grandchildren, are not the primary gifts of life. They're the gifts from God, of God, and back to God. That's a lot that I've said so far. So all you got to do is put God first, figure out how to do that today, and have a day of fire. I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye.